Hello and welcome to this session. We have with us Dr. Anoop Kumar, who is a mind-body strategist, an emergency physician. He's a best-selling author and is extremely interested and is undertaking research on Advaita Vedanta. Anoop, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kumaar. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Anoop, you've been doing a lot of work and writing and research around the mind-body connect. And whilst it is an important area at any given point in time, but I think in the pandemic, this is something which has come to the fore. And as people search for new meaning or new purpose or reevaluating what is really important in their lives, how do you see this entire interplay between mind, body, going forward?
Yeah, Kumar, you're right. Especially during this pandemic, when people are concerned, when systems are changing, then we're seeing the worry and the anxiety coming to the forefront. And to me, what this is showing in terms of the mind-body connection is that what we appreciated as mind and what we appreciated as body for so long is in fact not so clear to us as a society, right? Because when times get challenging, then we see how stable our foundation of knowledge really is. And so many times, I talk about mind-body strategy. Many times we talk about mind on one side and then we talk about the body. But if you look at the experience of every person, including you and me, including everybody watching this, if you look at the experience of every person, in our own experience, we are not classifying and dividing a mind and a body, right? In our own experience, what is the body? A body is a series of sensations. It's a series of colors. As we look at our own body, we see colors, we see forms, we feel textures as we feel our body, right? This is what we call a body, is these sensations. Now, where are these sensations occurring? When we look closely, we'll see, of course, this is our subjective experience, which we call mind. So therefore, in our experience, mind and body are not two things. Mind and body is the flow of experience associated with the sense of personal identity, right? This is the body. Now, when we conceptualize that, we say, you know what? Certain sensations, certain experiences are easier to share and talk about. And those are experiences of form, experiences of color, right? And so those experiences that have a more distinct form, that have a more distinct color, that is what we categorize as body. We say this is body, right? In fact, Descartes, going back, he was one of the philosophers, the French philosophers, who kind of separated this idea of mind from body and brought up this dualist philosophy that we still follow today. So we pay attention to those experiences that we classify as body, and we pay less attention to those experiences that are not so distinct to us, and that all we call mind. You notice we don't really have a good definition for mind, right? We don't really know what it is. It's kind of this vague feeling. We say, well, whatever that stuff is over there, we're going to call that mind. And this stuff that is easier to deal with. Why? Because we have trained our attention in such a way in the society since childhood to pay attention to certain experiences. And therefore, these are more discrete. So this is what we'll call body, and we'll primarily deal with this. Now, the challenge comes is when we create this dichotomy, is that when there is trouble, when there is a difficulty, right? When something is staring us in the face that is changing our lives, then we see the insufficiency of our models, our conceptual models. And this is when we kind of have to go back to the drawing board, just like an entrepreneur would do, just like an open-minded scientist would do, just like anybody would do when we're really faced with a problem and the models we're bringing to the table don't seem to have the answer. We'll say, you know what? Let's get rid of this model. Let's go back to what we know most fundamentally, right? First principles. Let's go back to first principles. First principles, what is this body? And what is this mind that is feeling anxious? This is the real beginning of inquiry, and looking to ourselves as the experts of at least the building blocks of our experiments. Others can be experts on the frameworks, right? Based on, for example, I'm trained in medicine, I'm trained as a physician, so I can talk about frameworks for how we talk about human anatomy and human physiology, but each of us is the expert in terms of how we are experiencing ourselves. and how we are experiencing what we call a body and a mind. So this investigation, which itself does not require any training, you don't need a PhD or an MD or a master's or any formal education to go back to the drawing board and say, wait a second, what is my experience of myself? And what is it that I'm talking about as a body and a mind? And there, insight starts to grow.
That is such an interesting, point, Anoop. We always refer to the mind when we are even referring to the brain, right? As a layperson, we always say, he's got a sharp mind or he's short-tempered, and it's all about the mind, which is, like you said, a nebulous concept. It's intangible. You can't see it, touch it, measure it. And it's almost counterintuitive because our consciousness is what, maybe just 1 or 2% of our overall sort of thinking at any point in time. Most of the other processes are in the subconscious, right? About 95 or 98, 99% of it.
Yeah.
In your research and practice, how have you been able to improve then the subconscious, the way we subconsciously respond and react? For example, you mentioned anxiety, and certainly we are living in times where most people are facing anxiety of some sort or the other.
Yeah.
What are some of the ways to think about it from a subconscious perspective?
Well, the first thing is to look at this division that we have between consciousness and subconscious, conscious and subconscious, and to ask a fundamental question, right? Everything that we know and everything that we experience, including what we call the body, including what we call matter, all of this is within our consciousness, or we might say is illumined by our consciousness, right? No matter where you fall in terms of your philosophy or your science, very few would dispute that anything and everything that we know is illumined by consciousness. And if there were no consciousness there, there's no knowledge there that we would be talking about. Even the very awareness that there is a subconscious is illumined by consciousness, right? We bring a certain awareness to recognize that. So then the question is, this line between the conscious and the subconscious, doesn't this also fall within our experience? Of course it does, because that's why we're even aware that there's a subconscious. So then what we're really talking about here is looking at this line that we have interpreted or that we experience, which seems to divide consciousness and the subconscious. And then recognizing through insight that, wait a second, even the awareness that there is a subconscious is in my consciousness. So this floor, this wall is actually a kind of superimposition or a kind of half there, half not there, right? As soon as we get this insight that even subconscious experiences, or what we think of as subconscious, maybe the dream that happened last night, even being aware that such a thing is possible or that such a thing happened is within our consciousness. Therefore, the key then is to delve more deeply into this question of what is consciousness, right? Is consciousness this puff of clouds as we see it in cartoons that kind of emanates from the cranium, right? Is consciousness created by the brain? Is it an epiphenomenon of the brain, as many scientists or philosophers would like to say? Or is it that there are many layers to consciousness, just as in the ocean, there are many layers to the ocean, and that the deeper layers of consciousness appear to be separate and distinct from the superficial layers simply because the vision isn't there, right? Just like if we're on top of the ocean, if we're bobbing at the surface of the ocean and we look down, there's only a few meters that we can see.
Sure.
The deepest, the ocean floor, where there's another entire world of creatures moving around, living in ways that humans could not even conceive of, that world appears to not exist. It's not even a consideration when we look down from the surface of the ocean. Similarly, when we talk about conscious and subconscious, from the outer layers of what we call consciousness, if we start to look at the subconscious, it appears to be totally out of reach. And if we look further down and try to understand what we call this world of matter and space and time that is around us, that's different. That's something totally different. We have to create a new concept for that. This is the kind of idea that comes. However, if we start to actually dive, right, what happens when the diver dives? then we see that all of these layers and even the apparent non-existence of a deeper layer, all of that gets reconciled, all of that gets integrated. What we thought was subconsciousness simply comes into the conscious. And there now subconsciousness is a deeper layer. As we go deeper, that layer too comes out. This is what we talk about in the modern society as talk therapy, logotherapy, seeing a psychologist, getting in touch with our emotions, walking in another person's shoes, checking our beliefs. All of these more modern terms are simply referring to, as we go more deeply into our consciousness, reconciling those experiences that were compartmentalized in the subconscious from maybe decades or longer ago, and thereby integrating our vision more deeply. This is what ultimately is the experience of well-being, right? There are some things that are certainly out of our control, but as we go deeper and deeper into what we are, we start to directly experientially investigate whether or not consciousness is something that is just produced by the brain as a happening, for a few decades of life, or whether in fact even this experience of the brain, the experience of what we call a body, and even the experience of what we call a world are appearances in this vast ocean of consciousness.
That is just an amazingly deep concept for one to fathom, and I can imagine why you spend so much of your time and effort in researching this. What are
Yes.
some of the simpler sort of tips or tricks that leaders in large organizations or not just in business but otherwise as well can use to their advantage to sort of stay connected on the mind body spectrum and use it for not just decision making but their own well-being?
Yeah. So I'll say one thing to begin with, and we'll go into those particular tips, and that is that for leaders, we have to understand how much power a leader has. It really is, especially if you're leading an organization or you're an industry leader, you have a tremendous amount of power, not just in terms of, financial decisions, strategic decisions. Yes, that's all also there. But even before that, in terms of how you see yourself and how you see the world.
Sure.
Just like I gave the example before, in terms of how we experience consciousness, how we experience our will, our sense of self. Is it something that is projected by its brain, or is it something much more vast? If a person experiences themselves as much more vast, right, in this broader perspective, then all of a sudden so many of the things in life that seem disconnected or that we have compartmentalized, like personal life and professional life, or financial decisions and strategic decisions, right, or HR decisions and leadership, these kinds of, all of this starts to integrate, right? And it's not a conceptual integration, it's an experiential integration, because all of these we see are certain avenues of thinking and ways of conceptualizing things, right? The growth of the organization in a way is reflective of my own growth as a leader.
Sure.
The degree to which the organization is integrated is reflective of my own integration as a leader, right? These aren't just fancy sounding bites or concepts. These are direct reflections. So I want to say that first, the depth and the intimacy of our reflection and our vision is reflected in how we see things. That's number one. So then the question is, how do we develop this reflective vision? How do we develop this deeper piece from which so many of the activities can be seen as an integrated phenomenon? Well, one thing is to recognize that every choice you make as a leader during the day moves your mind in one direction or the other. Every choice. And this includes the choices, especially the choices that we don't think about. So for example, what am I eating today? What food am I choosing today? You will see that there are certain kinds of food that make your mind calmer and more reflective.
Of course.
There are certain kinds of food that will make it more agitated. So simply, you don't have to change anything. Spend 2 or 3 days just noticing what you eat and then how you feel for the next 6 to 12 hours, right? If you simply do this for 3 days or a week, you will see which foods take you to the state of mind that is more reflective of the life you want to live. take a look at the clothes you're wearing. What kind of clothes that you wear, right? Is it a button-down shirt? Is it a t-shirt? Is it one color? Is it another color? Again, no need to change anything. Your pants, your shoes, don't change anything. Simply notice. And at the end of a week, go back and see which clothes made you feel certain ways. You see, this kind of not attending to these kinds of things is simply reflective of the conceptual divides that we've created. So by doing simple things like noting what you eat, not changing it, noting what you're wearing, noting what kind of conversations you're having and with whom, right? What kind of nutrients are we taking in, not just in terms of food, but in terms of ideas, in terms of who we're collaborating with. So that's another one. Food, clothing, what kind of conversations we're having, what time you're waking up and going to sleep. If you simply take a look at these 4 things, and then you will notice that certain things are moving my mind in a way that I'm experiencing my life better. I see more clearly. All the things that seem like agitations or seem like different things now just seem to be one thing. And they're all integrated. They all have meaning in relationship with each other. So this kind of observation is a first step. Now, having done this, as the mind becomes more reflective, now is a time for what we call meditation or mindfulness practices, right? Because now the mind has some grounding. It has a little bit more stability rather than it operating across a range. It's more steady now, right? So this kind of mind, now we say, let's give it a few minutes a day to simply sit within itself and allow it to run its course and finally settle. So that's, I would say, three steps that you can take. One, recognize your power, not just in the company, not just as a leader with a formal title, but as a human being. Your vision has tremendous power because people will follow your vision, even if you don't say it. They will be like you if you're a leader. Secondly, note your behaviors during the day. The simplest ones, the food I eat, the clothing I wear, the people I interface with. And based on that, you will start to make changes because it simply feels better to make the changes that make your mind restful and vast. And then finally, when the mind is ready, because we don't want to force it, but when it's ready, then try to practice some stillness and moving more deeply into the beautiful, vast layers of consciousness.
Thank you so much, Anoop. I think these are simple yet not easy tips. Simple enough to try and imbibe, and difficult enough to sort of many times spend years in the pursuit of the practice. But thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations and good luck with all the wonderful research you're doing. And I'm sure the amalgamation of Eastern philosophy, whether it is Vedanta or otherwise, with modern medicine is the need of the hour, and more power to you on that.
Thank you.